Folks, welcome to another episode of the Inciting Incident. I'm your host, Tim Shields. While I don't know my guest personally, we have said hello once or twice on speakerphone through our friend Mandy Kavanaugh. And you've probably heard me say on other podcasts that no matter what arena you apply it to, I think intelligence comes down to 5 words: the ability to recognize patterns. And that is what my next guest, John Peterson, does for a living. So are you ready for his bio? Here we go. John Peterson is one of the world's foremost futurists, renowned for his pioneering work in surprise anticipation and strategic foresight. As the founder of the Arlington Institute, he helps leaders and organizations navigate uncertainty using advanced forecasting tools, scenario modeling, and unconventional thinking. His expertise lies in identifying wildcards, high-impact, low-probability events that can reshape the world in an instant. A decorated naval flight officer and former advisor to the White House, National Security Council, and Department of Defense, Peterson has influenced high-level strategies on national security, energy, and global transformation. His best-selling books, including Out of the Blue and The Road to 2015, have guided policymakers, innovators, and visionaries in preparing for the unexpected. Beyond geopolitics and strategy, Peterson explores the frontier of human consciousness, paradigm shifts, and the deeper forces shaping civilization's future. He believes that the greatest revolutions won't just come from technology, but from shifts in perception, awareness, and how we understand reality itself. His work bridges science, spirituality, and disruptive innovations, offering a rare perspective on what's to come. Maybe you've also seen him on the What's Up series with Greg Braden, which I really enjoy. So, John, welcome. It's great to finally meet you.
Well, it's nice to meet you too. I don't know who wrote that. That's a new version of an introduction that I haven't heard before, but it's a pretty good one.
I wrote that. That's what everybody says. So I'll send it to you.
Yeah, great. Nicely done.
I always start this podcast with the same question because it's about the inciting incident. And my inciting incident happened when I was 17. So who were you? Where were you? And did you have any idea what you wanted to do with your life when you were 17?
Oh, no, I wanted to be an electrical engineer. I didn't articulate it quite that way at the time. I was a ham radio operator for a hobby, and I knew I wanted to get into engineering. And yeah, that was about what it was going to be. As it was, I came from a very religious, conservative religious background. And my parents wanted me to be missionaries, and I wanted to be an engineer, electrical engineer. And there was only one place in the country where those kind of two vectors intersected, and that was in a little college up in Northwest Arkansas with about 470 kids. But they had an electrical engineering program, and it was a Christian college, and you could study to go be a missionary in a missionary radio somewhere. They had really large radio stations, high frequency shortwave radio stations that they broadcast around. And so that's where I went. And then, to make a much longer story short, what happened was I joined the Navy when I was in sophomore year, in the reserves sophomore year in college. And when I got out, when I graduated, I got commissioned as an ensign in the Navy, and they sent me to flight school, and I learned how to fly off aircraft carriers in Vietnam and so on. And that was an amazingly expansive kind of experience in many, many, many ways that exposed me to the rest of the world. I'd grown up in Omaha, Nebraska, and so it was a really kind of a isolated, wonderful, frankly, but kind of isolated as a Midwestern situation. And the Navy sent me to San Francisco. I mean, it was great. Yeah, I didn't know anything like that ever existed before. So anyway, that's the way I got started on this stuff.
The world opened up to you very quickly. So your official title is a futurist. So I would like you to say how one becomes a futurist and how do you define the future, but also how did your upbringing shape where you are today? That's probably a big leap. So maybe you take the first two, however you want to do it.
And again, it's really long stories and we don't need to go through it here, but we lived in Chicago back in the late 80s, and had a number of kind of business reversals, I guess, and tried to figure out what we were going to do with our lives. And as it turned out, I ended up running a presidential campaign. I ran a big piece of Gary Hart's campaign, and I was the state chairman for him in Illinois. And in the process, I made a lot of friends up in Washington. And so when we were kind of looking around saying, what's next, we decided that we'd go back to Washington, and I'd start a think tank, the Arlington Institute, and we'd start to work with the Department of Defense. My interest at the time was to expand the notion of national security, because I had been exposed to lots of admirals and generals and secretaries and guys like that, and I knew most of them, or particularly the uniformed guys, were really good people at heart, doing what the best that they thought was good for the country, and that at that time, at least, they were really quite receptive to new ideas. And I was in a unique position to be able to contribute those kinds of things. And so we moved in '89 to across the river from Washington to a town called Arlington, Virginia, and we started the Arlington Institute. And I spent a good bit of time working with for I don't know, 10, 12, almost 15 years, working on different aspects of trying to broaden their perspective, to take into consideration that there was that social values were changing, and technology was coming, and the environment was changing, and all these things that were real bona fide national security issues that they ought to be considering. And so we made a lot of progress in the short time. And then little George Bush came in, and he wants to just kill people and break things again. And so then we started looking at global futures and where that all went. I mean, what you're getting to, and what I should mention for your audience, because they're not interested in that kind of stuff, I'm sure, but the thing that happened was that I had a couple of anomalous experiences, one of which I had an out-of-body experience. I was sitting on a couch pitching a project for the advertising agency that I owned, and all of a sudden found myself on the ceiling looking down, saying, you're down there and I'm up here. This is going to be really interesting to see where this goes, because I'm up here and you're going to run. You must have a recording or something, because you're going to run out of things to say because I'm up here. And then I sat there and watched it for a while, and then it kept going. And I said, well, that's interesting. You're keeping going, and you're making sense too. It was this really interesting kind of split reality kind of experience. And then bang, then the thing kind of flipped. And but after having done that and seen that, once you say, wait a second, this is not, doesn't work the way I thought it was. And then later on, when I started the Arlington Institute, we got a project. So I got a project for working for the Secretary of Defense to run all around the world and look at all the methodologies that were used for thinking about the future, and try to see if I could build a synthetic and a new kind of generation of ways to do that. And I was found in that search it was right at the beginning of desktop computers. It was back in 90, probably 89 or 90. And I found that there was this guy had this amazing kind of program up in Connecticut, and that was almost 100% accurate in terms of predicting election results and other kind of things, based upon understanding the underlying dynamics about what was going on, the economics and the social shifts and so on, and aggregating them in such a way that it was really accurate. But the guy was a dirtball. He was bad. And I had said to myself, no, I will never get in bed with anybody like that again. And I was sitting in my office at SATA in Washington, across the river, looking down on Washington National Airport one afternoon, talking to myself, saying, I don't know. Maybe I don't have anything that's even approaches this, and so maybe it's just one of those things where you just got to, just to do what you got to do, and hope that it's going to work out. And boom, everything went to kind of an amber colored, and I had 100% understanding about everything. And I was giddy about it. Started working my way around to the left, saying, "Wow, wow, 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 wow! Is this real? Is this real? Is this real?" By the time I got over to looking at the left, the whole thing kind of disappeared, and I went back. But I sat there and said, "God, where I've just been is 100% more real than." And I hit the table where I was on my desk, and it was very, very, very clear that there was some other thing going on here that I didn't really understand. And so I called up my partner who I was working with, and I said, "Bernie, we're not going to go with that guy in Connecticut. Something else is going to happen." And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "You just wait and see." And 20 minutes later, I got a telephone call from London from somebody who's introduced me to scenario planning, which became the basis of everything that I've done for the decades since then. And so there are a number of things like that have happened to me that have really been formative and kind of blown across up my engineering education informed paradigm. And what that did then translated into in professional terms is to essentially being the only futurist, the professional futurist. There's probably only a couple hundred of us in the world that are full time and involved in the futures business. And what I found out was that there's a bigger world out there than what most people are talking about. And so what I do and what we do here at the Arlington Institute is we look at the conventional world. So I can talk to you about economics and energy and transportation, whatever. But also the unconventional world, if you will, the other dimensional kind of aspects of life and other life on other planets and whatever else you want to talk about, fourth dimension, consciousness raising, all of which are part of the system, right? It's all about a system, systems thinking. And you alluded to that in the introduction about being able to see patterns, and you can only see patterns. If you're not dealing with a full deck, then you're not going to see the big pattern, right? And so in order to make sense out of this stuff, you just got to kind of aggregate it and have really kind of be very open, very permeable, so that the little beams of light of the new ideas and things kind of work their way in. And this is a wonderful time to be a futurist because there's more change going on than anything in the past. And we're into the most fundamental kind of restructuring of not only humanity, but how we all live on this planet. And so that's what we're doing right now.
So just out of curiosity, was there any kind of trigger or feeling when you popped out of your body, or did you were just boom, all of a sudden on the ceiling?
Oh, yeah, no, I was just on the ceiling and I had no idea. I wasn't looking, I was just reacting to the environment and the situation at the time. That is to say, I wasn't on the outside. I have participated in some hallucinogenic kind of experiences where, in fact, I've been on the outside watching myself, and you could kind of do an analytical kind of external arm's length kind of assessment of what was going on. But in this particular case, no, I was just up there watching myself, and I didn't have any idea until you started to integrate it a day or two later and say, what in the world was that?
I was talking with a friend of mine who I just reconnected with, and we were sending some podcasts and stuff back and forth. And she's like, "Oh, when it gets to remote viewing," she's very left brain, very scientific. "When it gets to remote viewing and all that stuff, that's just too much for me." And I'm like, "Well, have you heard of Annie Jacobson's book, Phenomena, The Secret History of the Government's Investigation into Extrasensory Perception, Psychokinesis? Did you ever read that one?"
Who, me? No, yeah. I know.
Yeah, all those. Of course, I know. I mean, that's what I want to ask you. I mean, that brought you to the Monroe Institute and remote viewing and all of this amazing stuff. How did you wind up at the Monroe, or working with the Monroe Institute. What
Oh,
were you
well.
doing with them?
I mean, that's an interesting story because I was out there running around doing this study for the Secretary of Defense, and part of what I had figured out pretty early on is that the future starts outside the box, right? It's never inside the box because that's kind of the conventional wisdom. So what you got to do is kind of work the edges way out. I like to think about it as a kind of like a junkyard or something that has got some diamonds kind of embedded out there, and you got to paw your way through all the trash in order to find the cool things that are going to then work themselves increasingly toward the middle as they develop and the ideas become embraced. And so I was running around to new science conference. There were at that time 89, 90. There were new science conferences, and there was one up in. And I didn't know anything about any of the stuff. I didn't even know it was on the program. I just knew it was about new science. So I'd go up and look at it. And so I went up to Colorado, to Fort Collins, and went to this thing in a Marriott up there, and went down the first day. And so there's this guy named Cleve Baxter who is giving a presentation. And I'd never heard of the guy. He stood up and he's introduced, and they say, Cleve Baxter is the chief of the lie detector kind of process for the CIA. Well, I came out of the military. I know that. I run around Washington. I know what that is. And so he does the polygraph stuff. And Cleve Baxter stands up there and says, well, yeah. And then one day I was thinking to myself, well, I wonder what would happen if I hook up a plant to my polygraph. And so he describes how he did that. And what he found out was, and he's flipping slides and showing all these pictures, and it's clear, there's my logical engineering brain just walked right down there and said there was no breaks in the logic of this. And what he found out was that the plants knew what he was, who he was. He'd done a series of experiments. They knew what he was thinking. They could tell the difference between him or somebody else who walked into the room. They knew if he was interested in they burn the leaf or somehow damage it, then the thing would go crazy. And it just blew my mind. My electrical engineering framework I remember going up it so much that I remember it was the 7th floor of the Marriott in Fort Collins. And I went and sat on my bed and put my head in my hands and said, how can this be? How can this be? How can this be? It just made no sense to me that plants could be alive. Well, that was enough. It took me 20 minutes. I mean, literally, I just sat there and said, this is just cannot be, but I saw the logic of how it works. Well, the next morning I go down and, there's this presentation by this guy who's this fine artist from New York. And he's got a side gig of interviewing and helping and dealing with people who have been abducted by aliens. I'd never ever heard of it. I mean, it was nuts. Never in my life have I ever thought about anything like that. And he too had slides. It was overhead projector, and they were flipping these slides and showing pictures, and they're showing, well, this little girl, she wakes up in the morning and says, "Mommy." The little guy comes in, he has the big eyes, and they took me, and she said, "Mom," says, "Oh, it's just a dream." She said, "No, they scooped off out of my leg." And the mother looks at the leg, and there's a scoop out of the leg, and it's all healed, and it wasn't there the day before. And he shows the pictures, and it's just driving me back into my chair again. God, I'm saying, what in the world is this? And then he tells a story about this one case, and he says, up on about 59th in Manhattan, 59th Street in Manhattan, we had some guy come in and he said, week ago or whenever it was, this craft came over and they sucked me out and took me up there and they probed me and they did these all kinds of things. And okay, it's apparently a common story to this researcher. And that alone was, God, mind-boggling to me. But then he says, 2 weeks later, another guy came from the other end of the block on 59th Street and said, yeah, well, I got sucked up and they were poking me and everything. And they compared and they looked at the two things and they said, wait a second, did you see another guy up there when you were there? And he said, yeah, there was another guy over on the other side of the craft. And they go back to the first guy and he said, yeah, there was a guy. And it was nuts again. I mean, I went back there into my head and my hand, another 20 minutes saying, how can this be? How can this be? And, after those kinds of things, then, at the time I had a top secret clearance and I knew my way around the system a little bit. So I went and I found, and I had heard about the remote viewing things. And so I dug my way down and found those guys and found Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann and all of the people who started the thing. And they became dear and old friends from the beginning.
Wow. Well, that's a great segue into this next question. I just contributed to my first white paper with Dr. Tara Deliberto and along with Dr. J.J. Hertog and Alan Steinfeld, among others. And so it's about preparing for the ontological shock of disclosure. So for those who don't know what disclosure means, it's the fact that we're not alone in the universe. And in it, she says, ontological shock in itself is not an adverse consequence. Ontological shock is a necessary part of the process of coming into alignment with the truth. So with that said, my question is in 3 parts. Why do you think the realization of off-planet entities or beings is so prominent right now? What is it that has kept the veil so intact? And why are we tiptoeing around it? What's it going to take to blow this wide open?
Well, let me start by saying why it's important to do this. I mean, if you systematically look at the second book that I wrote is called Out of the Blue, Wild Cards and Other Big Future Surprises. And what it was an attempt to kind of look across the horizon at different scenarios, different possibilities that could fundamentally change the direction of humanity or where they're going. And in particular, I was interested in benign solutions because it's easy to blow things up and scare people to death and so on and get them to change their behavior. And so I came up with, out of 85 different scenarios, kind of situations, 2 of them one was the return of the Messiah and the other one was E.T. shows up. And for all I know, they're synonymous. Who knows? But in any case, the whole business of other life is extraordinary and profound in terms of what its implications are, because just in 1 second, 1 sentence, you could say, when they show up, they're going to tell you that science doesn't work the way we know it is. We think it does. They're going to tell us that the history is not the way we thought it was. They're going to tell us that religion doesn't work the way we thought it was. They're going to talk to us and show us technology that we think is impossible to do. And they're going to expose us to new social kind of systems and mechanisms and ways to look at the world. It's going to pull the threads on all of the fabric of everything that the basis on which we describe and depend upon life. And so it's huge. And so why anybody in my business wouldn't have that one on the shelf and be looking at that, I don't quite understand. But there are a lot of people who are embarrassed about the notion, and that is a product of a very long, very active, very well-funded effort by the CIA and other intelligence community to disparage the whole ideas about these things. And you got to ask yourself,
70 plus years of it.
Yeah. Why would they do that? And what have they got going? Well, they probably got relationships going that have been going for a long time. And so the stuff is starting to come out right now. And so one of your questions is, why now? And I think it has kind of cosmological as well as kind of I don't know, psychological or something like that implications. I think that if you're familiar with the Ra books, the Law of One and all,
Mm-hmm.
they what they talk about is that every once in a while there are these moments in time when things are right for what they call a harvesting. And what happens is that for those humans who are at a certain level of consciousness, they get harvested, whatever that means, taken somewhere else. Maybe it's in a parallel universe. Who knows? But in any case, what it means is that there are two kind of variables in that little situation, and one of them is that there is a cosmological configuration that is unique. I mean, that's what time is. Time is a certain kind of configuration in the larger environment that we live in. And so apparently, however often it happens, maybe it's every 12,000 years or something like that, you get certain kind of alignments and maybe it has to do with the solar system going through the plane of the galaxy, which it does every 12,000 years. But something like that. There's an energetic, there's a kind of fabric of reality kind of opening that happens that makes it possible for humans to move to another level of being. And but it's only kind of, the window only opens for those who are kind of ready to kind of jump through, if you will. And so it's a function of also, secondly, of their level of consciousness, and that they can then, operate in some other environment. There's a whole bunch of different scenarios associated with that, not least of which, I've talked to multiple people who claim that they've been taken to another planet on the other side of the galaxy that, has most essentially the same characteristics as the Earth. And the only difference is nobody fights and they all get along, and it's a wonderful place. And they've been taken there by some other extraterrestrial group, and they say, you want to stay? And in every case, the people say, no, I got to get back. And in some cases, they literally say, okay, well, the next time that we come, you're going to have 30 seconds in order to make a decision about whether you want to go to that new world again, because there's something really big that's going to happen, and we're running around capturing and collecting up the people who are ready to go. Well, whoo! I mean, it's kind of biblical, kind of rapturous in terms of with a twist.
Yeah.
With an extraterrestrial twist that, and there's a bunch of other kind of varieties. Dolores Cannon talks about parallel universes where there's a, fourth and fifth dimension that's a parallel with this one, and you kind of move, and then they kind of split, and there's two different worlds. Ooh, it has the potential of becoming far weirder than anything that we kind of deal with in any kind of on a regular basis. And so I think that there is this kind of combination of things that have come, and that we happen to be living in the middle of it. It's also, there's the function of the yugas, what the Hindu kind of religion understands, or the Hindu, that says that there are two different kind of suns, and one is a dark dwarf, and you can't see it, but it influences, and our sun kind of run around in orbits that kind of intersect each other, and as they come running toward each other, they go faster and faster. It increases in speed, and as it turns and they head out, then they decrease in speed, and depending upon whether you're out on the edges or into the close, then it changes kind of like physics and how things work and how humanity works. And so, maybe it's one of those. I mean, there's certainly pretty compelling information to suggest that we're living in that kind of a period as well. There are just a bunch of different things that are all working together to suggest that this is really important. At the same time, again, to answer your question, I guess, is that something's been going on for a good while. And they've kept it under wraps for any number of reasons. I mean, there's pretty good reason to believe that Eisenhower, had a meeting out in the desert in California with representatives from some otherworldly group. And, the government made some kind of a deal at the time. So the stuff has all gone under the table, and it's gone all into black programs and things. But there is, I think, this kind of point in time that is influenced, by the way, by essentially some kind of an existential event that they see on the horizon 2, 3, 4 years from now. 2027, 28, 29, somewhere in there, there are multiple sources that talk about the possibility of a big flare coming out of the sun or any number of other kind of things. And so there is this kind of, if you will, metaphorically, they can see the edge of the cliff out there, and they know that they've got to make hay while they can. They got to, they're going to, the card game, the poker game's going to be over with here in a minute. And if they don't, gather up as many chips as they can, then they're going to lose it. I mean, this also goes back to the possibility as Elon Musk and Greg Braden and Nick, what's his name from Cambridge, all said, talk about it. Whether we live in an AI or a synthetic or a kind of environment. Well, there are people who studied that, and both in kind of in unconventional and unconventional kind of terms, who will say to you, well, yeah, it's a simulation, and it expands and it contracts and it expands and it contracts. And when it contracts, then it resets and turns and goes out again. And so I've been told by people who pretty compelling, seem to have a unique perspective. I mean, an accurate perspective of all of this, that it's going to reset itself here in the next sometime soon. It's not clear when it is going to be. Well, anyway, you've got all these kind of variables that are all showing up at the same time. And I just think that the disclosure thing is just part of it.
Yeah. Chris Bledsoe, UFO of God, that book. He talks about Easter 2026, and Robert Edward Grant was searching for he said something like a ruby in the paw of the Sphinx. But what Chris Bledsoe said is this star is going to appear right above the Sphinx, and it's a ruby color, and some big event is going to happen right around then. I guess we'll see as we march into the future. But
I just came from Egypt with Robert.
I wanted to ask you about that.
And he's our next speaker. We have a speaker series every month called Transition Talks. And Robert's going to be our speaker here in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, where we hold forth in May the 22nd, or March the 22nd. And we live stream it as well. But those are the kinds of things that I'm going to talk to him, and he's going to talk about. As a matter of fact, specifically, I've asked him to talk about the future. It turns out Robert, for some reasons that I don't quite remember, but he had a series of experiences which have opened up to him the ability to be able to see the future. There's a lot of kind of potential issues associated with that, like what future and so on. But nevertheless, it's really quite interesting because, I work with people like this. Penny Kelly, who's part of our quartet program, along with Greg Braden and Frank Jacob. She goes out and sees the future. I've worked with Chris Robinson, who dreams about the future on a very predictable and accurate kind of way. And so I'm going to ask Robert to kind of talk to us about what he sees coming downstream. So it's going to be very interesting. Sorry.
Oh, that sounds awesome. No, it's awesome. Where were you guys just on an expedition, or was he teaching and touring, or what were you guys doing in Egypt?
All of the above. 2 weeks. Yeah, it was long. And we ran all over the place. And 144 people. But
Wow.
Robert, of course, has made a name for himself finding and discovering things over there that nobody else knew. We didn't have an LED, or not an LED, but a LiDAR machine with us this time. But in previous expeditions or tours that he's led, he has discovered all kinds of inscriptions and information and symbology on the side of the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, and other such things like that. And so there is this. I went in part because of that, rather than just have somebody just describe what this is or what it might have been, to be able to then start to extract and build more things. Robert's discovered the new pyramid, for instance, that's sitting off to the side from the three major pyramids on the Giza Plateau. And why? Because he saw the kind of compatibility, the congruency with the stars, with the Orion constellation, and knew that the three major pyramids all lined themselves up with the belt of Orion. And then so you start looking at the other stars and saying, well, there ought to be another one here and another pyramid here. And if you go look, then you find them. And so
pattern recognition.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So let me ask you this. I mean, he has access to this information. Do you think that is reincarnation, or is that just being able to tap into that stream of consciousness right now? What do you think about reincarnation?
What Robert will suggest to you, I think, is that everybody has the innate capability to do what he does, and that it's just there is some kind of enablement, if you will, whatever and however that happens. It's like, these guys who get hit by lightning and suddenly they can do all kinds of things that they could see the future. I once wanted to go meet one of them, and I was talking to his assistant, and she said, "Did you ever shake his hand?" I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Well, if he ever shakes your hand, he knows everything about you." And so there are some kind of ways in which those kinds of capabilities seem to be innate. And I would suggest, by the way, that part of this evolutionary jump that we're about to experience is this expanded awareness about who we are and how the larger reality works. This expanded awareness of who we are is essentially the energy that's coming out of the center of the galaxy. There's waves of NASA measuring it and so on that are affecting our DNA, and that what I read suggests that originally when humans were designed, they were designed with 12 strands of DNA, and that they had an extraordinary kind of connection and capabilities and integration with the larger nature and everything, and essentially the controllers at that time, who ran the other dimensional beings, the archons, if you will, looked down and saw this and said, these guys are going to eat our lunch someday if we let this keep going. And so we're going to have to change this. And so they did genetic engineering. They cut that and cut up 10 strands of DNA, disconnected 10 strands, and they left them in us. And so they're still there. But what the waves of energy are doing is restitching together the 10 strands, which are going to then produce literally a new human that has the ability to connect intuitionally, as you suggest, into all that there is. And so that maybe people like Robert have had something happen that was physiological, that allows one to access those kinds of things. It's not unique. It's unique in terms of how he does it, because there aren't very many people who can run with him. He's pretty good. And but there's a lot of other folks around the world that that do strange and wonderful kind of things. And what it looks like is there's an aggregation of all of these abilities to do telepathy and to manifestation, any number of things that are the kind of emergent kind of pieces of what this new human is coming to be. And in the terms of being able to see the patterns, as you suggest, is that what you get is aggregation around these kinds of ideas, and more people come up and show up. And now there's, in China and all over places, they got all kinds of new generation kids that can do extraordinary stuff. And what it suggests is that there is this, they get bigger and bigger, and you get more and more kind of aggregation around the individual sources. Then all of a sudden, it all just rapidly kind of solidifies and flips into a new state, and you get a state change. And that's the essence of what this raising of consciousness, or this ascension, or any of the other kind of terms that are used. And that's what's going on here. And so
go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, I'm working on the final draft of my new book. And I've noticed every time, I'm turning into the book. I mean, the last 4 nights in a row, I'm up at like 4:50 in the morning, and I'm like on my phone writing these ideas that are coming through. And, this book that I'm putting out, I think it's going to come out in spring 26. Like, I could never have thought of this stuff. Like, I don't think I'm that smart. I just kind of go for a walk up in this Native American land, and I don't think any land has ever spoken to me more profoundly. And I just put on my headphones on and like ask the question. And it's like the act of going into trance, which is shutting down the thinking brain, allows you to be open to greater fields of information.
Sure. Well, it's the basis of the Monroe Institute. It's the basis of all of Joe Dispenza. It's the basis of a lot of these people are all. It's what's his name? The Silva method, Jose Silva. That's all.
Yeah.
All of those things presume that same kind of variations of that same kind of.
But anybody can do it. You just have to. But people are so busy in the 3D, in the external world, in this illusion, that they don't realize how the untapped power of the mind to transform anything, really.
Yeah, right. And once that happens, I'm convinced, by the way, that there's a kind of something that turns on. And particularly for those of us who are really trying to think about this and how you integrate this and how do you become adept in this space, there is something that just goes boom like that, and you say, that's the way it works. And because that's the way it works in anything, whether you're flying airplanes or whether I don't know, whatever the experiences that you want, at some point, what otherwise is complex and seemingly unrelated to each other suddenly comes together and you see it as a system, and boom, and now you get it. And I think that's the same way for these kinds of things.
I was thinking about it either last night or it came in the middle of the night or something, but it's like these downloads, you get just exactly what you just talked about. It's like, how the old computers, the huge mainframes had these punch cards.
Yeah.
So the punch cards is the pattern of information. So when you or I or whoever get these downloads, that they come in whole. So it's like you're getting this punch card, you're getting this download of information, but then you have to kind of parse through it if you want to express it to somebody. But it's like I'll be walking, I'm like, holy fucking shit, what the hell was that? And then I'm like scribbling in my computer while walking. Scribbling on my thing while walking through this canyon. But, I'm always trying to, think how to express these kind of internal things that are happening. But so I have a question for you. Your journey has been very interesting, from a left brain thinking to exposing you to this right brain thinking. So Dr. Joe Dispenza says reality is determined by a network of collective observers, which ladders up to Robert Lanza's theory of biocentrism. And for those who don't know what the theory of biocentrism is, it suggests life and consciousness are the fundamental components of reality rather than being mere byproducts of the physical universe. So, as a futurist, you live in a world of probability. As an artist, I live in a world of possibility, because who the hell would want to be an artist? There's nothing secure about it, etc. But like, what is that intersection, if this makes sense, of probability and possibility?
It goes back to, as I suggested, this expanded awareness of an understanding of how this reality works and who we are in much broader and more sophisticated terms, in how that interfaces with those things. And the probability thing, this gets pretty deep and pretty quick. But this all goes back down to, it seems to me, the essential animating field from which we all arise. Now, you can call it the 0-point energy field, like some of my friends call it, or you call it love, in the community where
God,
I was
quantum field. Yeah.
Yeah, God is love, and that's the way I was raised. And what I've come to believe is that it's literally the case, is that the exhibit of the essence of the creator of all of this is love. That's what we see. And what it is I have a nuclear physics, a quantum physicist friend of mine who has worked in the 0-point energy field, who says, by the way, that he says that if they ever figure out how to do generators for 0-point energy, that you're probably going to walk by them and you're going to feel love, because they have concentrated this 0-point field in a very concentrated place. And that's what we mean by love. Well, that's probably what beauty is about. And that when we see things that have these wonderful symmetry or reaction and their perfectness in their own kind of way, what it is this love bleeding through all the levels of social construct and the other stuff that we've put together to try to tamp down and diffuse the essence of who we all are. And so that's where all of the probabilities come from, it seems to me. I don't know. I spent a good bit of time trying to think about, the best way to enter this kind of situation, this field, this operating space, because, I'm a left brain kind of intellectual kind of guy. And so I think about things that a lot of other people don't think about. And so I see there's value in that. Why would you be parachuted into this experience if there wasn't some kind of value in that part of the whole life experience? And so I think but that's not everything, because there's this balance, this left brain, right brain, if you want, in those kinds of terms. But it's kind of broader than that in terms of male and female, and this balancing thing that starts to access both sides of all of this. And of course, you can do that through art, but it's helpful. I guess I find it slightly frustrating when you run into somebody and they say, well, I feel like this. It feels. And I'm saying, well, what is it? How do you measure it? What is it?
Yeah.
So I'm on it. So there's this balancing somewhere. And what you're essentially describing is kind of the end of or far into the right brain side that says, how is art and how do you make this all come together? And I guess I work mostly on the left-hand side, saying, well, what's it about and how does it work and why does it do what it does?
Yeah, I think these kind of, I could be wrong here, but these transcendental moments are when the whole brain is sinking. So it's like, again, it comes back to that balance of polarity, which is a construct of this dimension. What's the most surprising thing you've learned about how the power structures think about the future that you've come into?
There are common kind of assumptions that, quote, the government or the powers that be, or the deep state, or however you want to define it, know about this. And what I can tell you I worked in the White House, and I can tell you that no, there are little places within the system, because it's a very, very large, very complex system, and it's got
The spider web.
pieces you've never even heard of and want to know about, I guess. And so there are that this is not commonly understood, and I suppose it's like life in general, and that you have, whether it's in terms of filmmaking or architecture or whatever it might be, you got some folks who look at the world and look at themselves differently, and they excel and they do wonderful, kind of amazingly kind of creative things, and they're way out of the box from where the rest of the folks are. And so there is that kind of aspect to it, I think, that's important. And I've forgotten what the rest of your question was.
Oh, it was just about the power structures, but I remembered what I wanted to say, and it was about, so in my new book, I was kind of talking about, like, imagine you have a balloon and everything in this third dimension is filling up this balloon, and information is filling up the balloon. So it's expanding, and as it's expanding, the walls get more porous. So all of this information is bleeding into this reality. I mean, I kind of think that's what's happening right now. I think time is a river of information flowing towards us. It needs a observer. And then I think about it as the fractal present moment. So the deeper you go into the present moment, that's when you have access. When you shut off the senses and everything like that, that's when you have access to all of that information. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's an interesting possibility. I think there's about 5 or 6 other ones that, if we had the time, we could probably unpack, that other kind of frameworks or theoretical frameworks about how this works, that it all goes to the matter of time, and how if it exists, and if everything is one, and if everything exists there. And there's a whole lot of kind of, and I don't know. It's not because I haven't thought about it, but there are things going on here. I mean, there's an arrogance about so much about the way we live, science and government and other kinds of folks, that imply or presume that they know how things work. And the fact of the matter is, none of us really know how it works. And we are kind of working our way through the dawn, if you will, a little bit of light through a very complex system, and trying to figure out and touch the different pieces. And I just think you have to stay very permeable and very porous and open-minded about how you go into this kind of space, because the second you think you understand it, the second you've built your own box and constrained yourself from other kind of possibilities. And we're into a time of exponential change. And it's not only in terms of science and technology and stuff, but it's these experiences that, if there's these waves of energy coming and turning on DNA and other kinds of stuff, I mean, it's nuts what the potential implications of that might be. And you can literally wake up some morning and be able to see the world in a whole different kind of way and have no idea why it happened. And that then, raises all kinds of questions about sanity and other kinds of stuff. I mean, it's just really big, disconcerting kind of stuff. And that, you want a metaphor for that: childbirth, right? So you're going from one state to another one, and it's full of all kinds of trauma and funny lights and images that you don't recognize and things like that. And so it's
water world to a physical world.
Yeah. And so I think you just need to be sensitive to that, and you need to. I always come back saying, God, you don't know anything. I mean, you think you know. Every time you get to where you think you know something, then if you think about it a little bit more, you say, well, wait a second, that doesn't work. That may not be the same.
I think that is wisdom, the opposite of arrogance, knowing that you don't actually know anything. And we really live in a consensus reality. The only thing that is truly real to us is our subjective experience and our interaction with this physical world.
To the extent that that's even real, and maybe it's just contrived, and maybe we're inside of a simulation, and maybe, on and on.
Exactly. It could just all be a projection of our consciousness.
Yeah.
So in this new book, originally I was talking to my 17-year-old self, and I said, this is the central question to your life that you're going to try to unpack. For me, it's, am I powerful enough? Do I believe in myself to become the creator, executor, and master of the dream? What is the central question of your life? What are you trying to uncover?
I did a talk here at our transition talk series. I do it every once in a while, once a year or so. And I did one just a month or so ago, and it was kind of a 4-hour long kind of tour of the horizon. And I described a dozen different scenarios, each one of which is different way. And every one of them is basically plausible. And, and they're supportable. They're not just hand waving kind of science fiction thoughts about what might show up. And what happens when you do that is that, as I said earlier, you become very tentative about this whole business and where it's going, where it could go, and what could happen. And I really have the reason I've had some success in this business is that there are times when I get these insights, and I know qualitatively that the idea is right. And I may not be able to at the time. I'll build the logic and the plus and minuses and all that kind of linear stuff around it. But, and it always turns out to be right. And so I've got a sense that this is reality, where we're going is stranger. Has the distinct likelihood of being stranger or weirder, if you will, than anything that we've seen before. And you can see, as we've talked here about the possibility that even with the advent of the engagement with extraterrestrial life, it's suddenly just in kind of conventional kind of terms, but it's, I don't know, it's kind of like, doing a drug trip and finding out there's a whole different world out there that you never, ever thought existed. And you just come back and say, wait a second, this is what I've been exposing to, and what I see on a day-to-day basis is so little of what's out there. And then all it does is start raising a whole lot of questions. And so when you look at all those kind of scenarios, there's a whole variety of them. Whether you're in a simulation or not, or whether the aliens are going to come and save your bacon, or whatever it turns out to be. But there's one set that has to do with this digitization. It's really kind of the Matrix scenario from the movie that says that what's happening here on this world through AI and through digital central bank digital currencies and through all of the nanotechnology and the other kinds of stuff is this rapid constriction coming together to control humans at the most fundamental level in every way. So, which is to say that now all they need to do is plug you into one of those canisters and throw a bunch of gook over you and plug a thing in the top of your head, and they just use you for an energy source. Like they did in the movie in The Matrix. Well, there's something like that. I mean, you've got guys like Eric Schmidt, who used to be the CEO of Google back then. And he was saying 7 or 8 years ago that within 10 years, 85% of all the jobs that existed then would be obsolete. Well, we got another couple of years to go, but we're being driven up this track by AI that is running up exponentially, and where it's going, nobody knows. He now comes back a couple of weeks ago, Schmidt does, and says if we don't do something about AI, it's going to eliminate humanity in 10 years. Now, you can argue all kinds of things about Eric Schmidt, whether you like him and whether he should cut his hair differently or whatever. But when a guy of that kind of substance starts to talk in those kinds of terms, nobody's ever done that before. And so it starts to set this window about how much time we've got left and so on. And so I think that we've got about 2 years left. But before essentially the door closes, that they've got all of the pieces together, they can shut off your car, they can shut off your money, they can influence the thoughts in your mind, they can extract your thoughts, they know where you are, they can control your bodily functions. They got you, and if you don't behave the way they like, then they literally that you have no choice. Well, we've got
they take away your humanity.
Yeah. And so what we've got is a choice. I mean, in really simple kind of terms, I think of it as if for some stupid reason you built your campsite on a railroad track, and all of a sudden you wake up some morning and there's the locomotive coming down there and it's blowing its horn, and what are you going to do? Well, you get up and move, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing if you go to a party and it just isn't working and it's a waste of your time. What do? You hang around there and still no, you leave. And that what we have to do is essentially start to build a new world. We have to start and get off on the track and literally start to build the framework for a new world. And so you ask me what I'm interested in, that's what I'm interested in. And that's what we're trying to do here at the Arlington Institute, is build a global collaboration platform. We call it Transition Net, where millions of people around the world, all in a very curated and organized kind of way, with chapters and everything, so that they can build local communities and within different cultures and so on. But they can all contribute in a very systematic and rapid kind of way, accelerated by AI. And we're working on having our own kind of version of Chat GPT that really understands all of our stuff, metaphysics, alternative energy,
Wow.
Food, healthcare, so on, and that it becomes an integral part of the decision, just like Google is, where people use it every day. And this could be a way in which you could go in this new direction, and it accelerates the whole process, gives you options in a hurry. You can choose and help, and it all it does is it gets smarter and smarter. But what you do is co-opt the technology in order to head us off and build a new world, because we need to build a new framework. And this is not a top-down kind of thing. It's really about working your way down to a level of granularity where you have the basic architecture and you understand what the organizing ideas and the principles and the values and the other stuff in this new world might be, and then what that translates into new technologies and transportation and energy and legal situation and education, or whatever it turns out to be. But if you kind of get an internally consistent system put together like that, and then it kind of just floats on the top of the water of the to wherever the new world, and how the whole thing emerges. But you have
that's the track I want to be on, because AI is neither good nor bad. It's about the people who are programming it. So in some regards, it's a mirror of our collective consciousness, which is why I think the only way out of this is like the rapid expansion, ascension, whatever term you want to use, of the collective consciousness. I mean, I'm an optimist. I feel that's happening. I see it in people I never would have ever thought would be interested in these subjects. And, hopefully I will continue to push that out there with my books and this podcast and all that stuff. But yeah. So let me ask you this. Looking back at your life's work, what do you hope your legacy will be? And what's one idea you'd like to leave people with, thinking about the future? Where should their mind be?
Well, what I would like people to think about is what I've just said, and that is that we have a limited amount of time, measured in months, literally, in order to start to build the framework the basic architecture for a new way of living. Otherwise, we get locked for lots of reasons that are easily explainable. You get locked into this dystopian track that's going in quite a different kind of way that has amazing kind of downstream implications if you listen to some of the sources that talk about that. And so the most important thing is, I mean, really good things. Maybe the aliens come and clean us up and give us a ride, take us to somewhere else. If that's the case, then it doesn't make any difference. But if it isn't the case, then you better cover yourself over this one scenario, and that's that we got. And the way to do that is to build a new world, and the basis for a new world. So that's really the most important thing. And and out of that, by the way, are the likelihood of new countries and other kind of things coming downstream. I mean, the most accurate predictive model that's been right 40 years in a row. It's run by an economist down in Florida called Martin Armstrong, has for 40 years been saying that in 2027, the United States breaks up and exists no more. And then it reconstitutes over the next 5 years into about 5 new countries. And by 2032, you're off in a whole different kind of way. Well, hey, how about let's build a new country that's built around these whole new principles and these other kind of things? That'd be something to leave as a legacy, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I see, it's so crazy on X and stuff like that. People are so, just consumed with this division and peer. So actually, here's one more question I want to ask you. Let me see if I can find it. But so people are so consumed with this Republican versus Democrat thing, which is just a social condition and a program by the government or whoever is in power. What do you think humanity could be if we stop this ridiculous program of fear and division and separation?
Well, what you essentially are observing is the implosion of the old system, because you can see it all over, whether it's in political terms or different agencies of government or whatever it turns out.
And people are fighting to keep this alive.
That's exactly right. They're fighting to keep it alive, and as it collapses, what it generates is a vacuum for the emergence of a new world, and that's what. So we're trying to get ahead of that, and let's go do that before it solidifies. I mean, there are forces in play here. We've alluded to them that are non-human, and they are an integral part of the world and the system in which we live in and the environment we live in. And if you don't take those into consideration, then you're making a mistake. I mean, I think David Icke has done a really admirable job of kind of raising the possibilities and those kinds of ideas, and they're very, very important. And so we need to be working kind of down that stream. Again, I forgot your question.
Well, it was just about what the world would look like if we didn't have this, fear and separation division program.
Yeah. Okay. What all the separation, the political stuff, all of that's all diversionary. This is the classic kind of magician thing that runs his hair, with his other hand he's shoving stuff in his pocket or whatever it turns out to be. And they're trying to keep you from seeing the larger what's happening in the larger sense. And what's happening in the larger sense is what I've just talked about, and that is this closing down, whether it's with nanotechnology and all this kind of extraordinary kind of IT information technology that they're doing, and it's coming together, and it's going to be, you're not going to be able to get out of the thing. The alternative world is the one you need to go out and build, and we need to get rid of all and forget it. And by the way, all the energy, any energy you give to that thing keeps it alive. And so we would need to, and the whole system, and it's coming out about USAID essentially taking CIA money and spreading it to 900 different sources, or was it 9,000 all around the world? I mean, they
The
essentially
shell
own
game.
they own the press. The
Yeah.
intelligence community owns the megaphone. It owns the communications mechanism for the whole world. And so what you can't do is give it credence and credibility. And you essentially, in a way, you got to quit listening to it, and you've got to go off on your own way, and we got to build our own new world. Greg Braden and I talk about we got to find a new media company that starts to build the pictures of what this new world could be like, so in coherent ways, so people can see what
I
it
love
is.
that.
Yeah, and so that's I think I, I mean, it's diversionary, and
Yeah.
it's interesting, and you should know at some level you should know about it, because otherwise you'd be ignorant, and you're operating in this kind of space, and you really don't want to be surprised, because if you're ignorant, then you're open to being surprised, and so you need to know about it. But there's a whole different agenda and a different direction and a new world that we ought to be aiming toward, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Not only are you ignorant, but you are actually a slave to someone else's thinking or ideology, etc. And as you were saying that, I just, I had this vision how you were talking about them trying to close this off. It's like humanity consciousness is reaching for this galactic community. And it's like there are these forces that want to keep us separate from it. And what is it at the end? It's all oneness. The sum total of everything is one, I think. So, man, we barely, or did you want to comment on that?
No, that's a nice place to end, I think.
Yeah. We barely scratched the surface on your life and career, but I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for all you're doing. I mean, I'd love to talk to you again at some point in a couple months, because there's so much we could cover. I had multiple pages of notes here, highlighted red pens. But where can people find you? Definitely the What's Up series on YouTube with Greg Braden, and you just shooting the shit. I love watching that. Where else can they find you?
Well, it's all at arlingtoninstitute.org. And at the Arlington Institute, we have another number of programs. We're in the business of facilitating the transition to this new world. So everything that we do is pointed in that direction. And we have a monthly speaker series called Transition Talks, where we hold forth, and we produce it here in Berkeley Springs, our little resort town about 100 miles from Washington and Baltimore. And so Greg comes every year. Dave Martin, Robert Grant will be here in March, and so on. And we also live stream it, so it's available anywhere in the world. And so that's one thing to look for. We have a newsletter called Future Edition that we've been publishing for 35 years. It looks all broadly about all kinds of things. It's free. You can get that by coming there. We have a quartet, which we produce, which is a deep intellectual dive every 2 weeks into the essence, some major issue related to this transition to a new world. And that's, I facilitate that. And then Greg Braden is there, and Penny Kelly and Frank Jacob. Our next subject is going to be what's kind of the characterization, or what's the imagery of what the new world might look like, and think of it in terms of kind of branding. What could you kind of find that? And so we dig at that for a great deal, and people like that. And then we have, as you say, What's Up, which is just Greg and I riff for half an hour on whatever on our minds, and it always turns out to be kind of interesting and kind of fun. And so
I love watching it.
Yeah, we got a number of other things, but it's all at arlingtoninstitute.org.
All right, there it is, folks. The funnel is arlingtoninstitute.org. Get involved with this. It's pretty fascinating stuff. John, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tim. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, you too. And, if you like this, share it, subscribe on YouTube, like all that garbage that you're supposed to say, but it will make, I keep saying this, it will make my publishers very, very happy. So you'd be doing myself and them, my overlords, you'd be doing them a great favor. So anyway, until we meet again next time, thank you so much.